and welcome, fellow awesomeologists, to Awesomeology. I'm Sue.
And I'm Ben. In this episode, we're back with an update on our journey toward total and radical accountability.
Today, we're going to talk about the concept of pairing, quote unquote pairing. I included air quotes for no one, and how pairing prevents functional teams from really becoming accountable.
For the record, Sue, I benefited from your air quotes, so thank you.
You're welcome. Anytime.
Yeah, I appreciate you so much. We're going to explain what pairing is, some theories about why we all do it at one time or another, and explore how we can start to curb it on our own team.
But for us, the most exciting part is going to come after we've released this episode. So we first have to get through it. We have to record it and have smart things to say. And then we're going to release it. And then we are going to go back to our team and have an honest discussion with everyone about how we are guilty of pairing on the team and how we can get that much closer to dealing with our real issues together. So that's the idea here, getting stuff done.
That is the idea. The recording it, I'm confident in. The having something smart to say, well, jury will be out, I suppose.
You know what? We do our best.
Yeah.
With the talents we've been given. And what are you going to say? You know, we think we're smart.
I think you're so smart.
Yeah. Thank you. Well, I think, speaking of how smart we are, I think it makes sense for us to start with the definition of pairing. So do you want to kick us off, Ben, and tell us what is pairing?
Let's do that. The simplest way to describe pairing is, again, air quotes, that'll only be helpful to you, talking behind someone's back. And specifically, we're talking about things like discussing the gaps in someone's work or knowledge that affect the whole team.
Right. And this is a thing we've all done at one time or another. It's common. It's common
human.
In work culture.
It's very human.
Yeah, it's extremely human. And we'll talk about where it comes from too, a little bit later. But let's talk about, I am very interested if you have examples of this. Well, number one, other than us. Because I think that we are very good about acknowledging when a discussion that you and I are having separately turns from trying to problem solve into venting, pairing, complaining,
right,
being mean girls.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I know we're going to dive into this a bit more, but I mean, I think one thing just to acknowledge off the bat is a lot of times it happens without it intending to happen, right? Like we're talking about a problem or something that didn't go really well, and then it morphs into, well, like, give me an example. Like, what are you talking about? And that example includes a person or a process or something that then we wind up talking behind someone's back, and
right.
Like you said, though, I do think, I mean, I'm sure it's only ramped up as we've started this process about accountability, but I think even long before that, I think, speaking only for you and I, we've always been pretty good at identifying it, being like, this is not helping, definitely not helping that person, it's not helping us. So let's talk next steps, or do we need to bring that person into a conversation or whatever, and I definitely will not claim that we detect that every single time or get that right every time, or that we take the right next steps all the time. We're not perfect by no means, but I do think we're pretty good at identifying it and shutting it down because we know how unhealthy it can be, right?
Right.
So your question of, like, examples, I mean, I don't know that I can really give one that also would be unhealthy for me to even, like, bring up. I think it's just simple for me to acknowledge that while I think, speaking only of myself and my observation and opinion of myself, I think I am very good at not engaging. And I think to that point, when it happens, it's easier for me to identify the behavior, like me saying, like, me being a part of pairing, me being a part of that conversation. So And that, I don't know, as I'm saying all this right now, I'm like, oh my God, dude, you think you're so, I'm giving myself way too much credit. I'm sure I'm not as good at it as I think I am, but I don't know. I guess
But
maybe I think that's jury's out on.
as I've always said, you do bring that young Jimmy Carter energy.
That is true. I do get a lot of acknowledgement for diplomacy
Right.
or or having the words that as I'm struggling to find words, that coolest situation, because I think that
Mm,
that's an outcome that can come from, not engaging in pairing, is like tempers can come down because you can acknowledge, or, the weight of the situation can feel less because you acknowledge that you're maybe piling on someone or piling on something. And it's really hopeful to talk next steps and think about what it might be like to get them involved and not be talking behind their back, because on the other side of that is a solution or change or something that's going
right.
to wind up making your team, the organization better. So by getting to those next steps and looking forward, you can take the moment that you're in right now that can feel heavy and emotional, and you take a breath and on we go.
Right. Yeah. Well, and the example that I can bring to the table is, I know I have used with you off air, definitely before. And I know I've used it with you because I've used it with everyone, because it is one of my go-to examples. And I think for what we're talking about here, when we talk about pairing, we're talking about discussing in a negative, probably with a negative outcome, something that another party, a third party, is doing, saying a gap in their knowledge without bringing them into that conversation. That's pairing. And so the example I can give you is actually pairing of a group which exists. So pairing is not just, a good example of pairing is the meeting after the meeting, right? Where you and your work best friend go into a meeting and then you have to talk crap about people in the meeting after the meeting. That is a simple explanation of pairing. But another example I can give is when I was part of an organization that was going through a merger. And we were in one location, there were multiple locations, and the management made the commitment at the very beginning of the process to be totally transparent. And at that time, I had not been in management. No one I was talking to had that experience of having to balance total transparency with not saying things you don't know, right? Not leading people down a road of, it could be this thing, it could be that thing, it could be, So this group that I worked in really got into this unhealthy cycle of every time something would come up about the merger. So we'd get an email or we'd get a phone call, or, somebody from management would mention it. Instead of asking questions, we'd wait until that person went away. And then the group would ask each other questions. Well, what about this? Why didn't they say anything about that? Why isn't that thing changing? When are we going to know about this? And it wasn't until I was away from that I realized how terribly toxic that was. Because what it led to was we would be asking each other, well, why didn't they say something about this? Why didn't they say something about that? And the punchline at the end of that conversation was always, and they don't answer any of our questions. Right? So it was definitely the most toxic situation I can think of in, trying to work through group dynamics. And it was not like, that was a situation that bubbled up. And I couldn't tell you exactly where there was a breaking point, but at a certain point, it bubbled up to somebody said something to someone in management, and it ended in a pretty predictable way, which is that person saying, hey, we're transparent. We don't have those answers.
Yeah.
So we're telling you what we have to tell you, what we know, when we can tell you. And if you keep engaging in the, this toxic non-discussion, it's only going to upset you.
Right.
And that, and I'm going to be very gross, trigger warning for anyone who is sensitive about hearing about animals hurting each other. But that is when I, learned the allegory about when a chicken gets blood on it, the whole group attacks that chicken, right? And it's just this destructive thing where it's just attack mode, and for no good reason.
Right.
So I thought it was a worthy version of pairing, just because I don't want people to get the idea that, like, if you're talking to 3 people and not just with 2 people, you're not pairing, so it's
Right.
fine.
Right. Yeah. Right. Yeah. Or if you start every sentence with, I mean, no offense, but that also,
Also,
you're
still,
probably
it
still
can
pairing.
still be really offensive.
So since since we know what's going on with chickens now,
Yeah.
let's think about us as people. And why is it so common? Why is pairing something that we engage in?
Because we are pack animals, because we, a thing we, even the most introverted of us, crave a connection of some kind.
Yeah.
So we want connection, we want validation. I think when probably one of the most insidious, as I think about the kind of pairing I have done, probably one of the most insidious versions of it starts with me looking for confirmation, quote unquote, looking for confirmation.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
it's that conversation. It's that going to your coworker and saying, am I crazy or did this just happen? Right? Which, if you could say, am I crazy or did this just happen? And that other person could say, yes. Or no, it did not happen. You're, overthinking it. And then you could walk away.
Mm. Yeah.
That is purely confirming, you know, what is going on in your mind. But as humans, we want to take that confirmation and turn it into a connection. We want to sort of exploit that moment of confirmation and make it part of our relationship.
Yeah.
And I think something that can be really destructive is if you start to do, if you have a work best friend that you spend a lot of time seeking that kind of confirmation or doing that kind of pairing, you start to do that thing where you're building a story about someone else for each other.
Yeah.
And you get down a road of, well, I heard that person does this thing. And,
Yeah.
I remember one time, they did that thing. And now you and I have built this mythos
Right.
around someone else.
Just confirming each other and building on each other. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think it becomes where you can't, there's no separation, right? So we've had this long discussion about, I know this thing, you know that thing. Well, now suddenly we both know these things. We're both really sure of them.
Yeah. Right.
So, it's about, like, it comes from a really nice, pure place. It comes from a place of wanting connection with another person. And just like a lot of things, we managed to make it bad.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and I think there's times that it can come from a very unpure place too. I mean, it's worth at least acknowledging that maybe at its, root, or, if you boil it all the way down, it's a very human thing, us seeking connection or something. But yeah, I think, for me personally, the reason why I've probably engaged most, and I imagine it's common, is um, some weird combination of like personal insecurity, or like an unwillingness to be vulnerable in a certain setting, whether it's a small setting with people that I think are, I don't know, more qualified than me, or a group setting that I'm just afraid to, like, at scale, make myself look like an idiot. So then in turn I'll, have that meeting after the meeting, or that pocket
Mhm.
conversation, which mostly is, a more comfortable space for me to ask the same question that I should be asking in front of the whole group, or me purely seeking validation. Like, I need someone to tell me they agree before I'll raise this as a real issue, or
Mhm.
I need someone to agree with me so I know I'm, justified in some way, and I may or may not say anything or do anything with that confirmation. You
Right.
know what I mean? I think that's the worst case scenario, is you have this separate conversation that only creates extra time and drama and uneasiness and
Mhm.
toxicity. And then as a result of getting the thing that you wanted, which is confirmation, you do nothing with it. You know,
Right.
you just like, no, oh, well, I know that that person agrees with me and I'm not an idiot, but everything still is messed up. Ugh, gross, whatever. It's just like
Yeah.
worst case scenario. So yeah, what do you think? What do you think is, there's, so okay, maybe a conclusion that we're coming to is, don't have the meeting after the meeting. Be a bit vulnerable. Hopefully you work in a
Mhm.
place where, the culture is one that at least, on some level accepts people to um, ask a question that maybe they should know the answer to, but you're just going to be
Mhm.
open and honest and trust that people aren't going to call you an idiot or think
Right.
less of you, but they're just going to help, right? What do you think might be a potential negative outcome to um, trying to fix it? So, like, if I'm going to make the choice, I'm not going to do a pairing room. I'm not going to have any of these meetings after the meeting. But instead, I'm going to do this. Like, what are some potential negative outcomes of trying to fix the problem? Am I asking a real question?
I think you're asking a real question. I think I'm understanding the question. But for clarity, I am wondering, uh, is the question you're asking, what do we perceive to be the negative possibilities?
Hmm.
Is that
Yeah. Yeah. Great question. Maybe it's a great question to the question. Maybe it's
okay?
a perception that someone has that then would just give them comfort to continue to pair,
Right.
or maybe it's a misstep that winds up being like additionally destructive, or maybe more
Mhm.
destructive, because you're trying to do the right thing, but really just maybe adding to the problem or doing another version of like toxic behavior.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and I can, so answering my question, which was my question that I added to your question, uh, I can see uh, one of the potential negative outcomes of deciding I'm not going to pair. I am going to deal. I'm either going to make the decision, because I actually think there's two routes you go on. Either this matters enough to me that I'm going to deal with it. It's a real issue, or I'm going to deal with it, with the team, or um, it is a not real issue, or a real issue that this is not the time or place, right?
Mm.
So there are a lot of reasons you could decide not to do it.
Yeah.
But you make your decision in the moment, and you are vulnerable, and you say, like, maybe side note, and the people we work with know that one of my main exports is saying, maybe I should know the answer to this.
Mhm.
So you do know that that is not something that is something I have learned not to struggle with, to be really, really clear. It's
Sure.
something I've learned not to struggle with in our team. Um, I think the perception someone can have going into that situation is that the stakes are way higher than they actually are.
Hmm.
And that is a common thing we all carry with us all of the time. What we think people think about us is usually so off the mark. And primarily, the reason we are so off the mark is because people just straight up aren't thinking about us. So that perception that you have that I'm going to bring this up and it's going to cause all these troubles and so I shouldn't do it or whatever that is, or it's going to be a reputation risk for me. I think there is a more than even chance you do it, you take the leap in that public setting with your team, and people are so busy focused on their junk that it does not even hit their radar. And maybe it's good news because they're so focused on their thing or thinking about the question they want to ask, or maybe they're going to go and talk to their work best friend later after the meeting, that they just answer it because they have no, they don't have an inner dialogue that even includes you. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
I think
Yeah.
we perceive the risk is really, really high.
Yeah.
And the risk is probably
Not.
really low.
Yeah. Yeah. I think another, as you're talking, I think another thing that comes to mind is as like a potential negative outcome of trying to deal with it or improve is complacency. You might wind up not asking the question that you have to ask to anyone,
Right.
and in turn, a discussion, what might be a healthy discussion, never happens. Like, hey, why does this thing keep happening, or why does this thing keep coming up, or why does this thing never come up? Some of those questions might be just enough for the thought to get out on the table. And then I suppose the bait or the temptation from there is, well, let's figure this out right now, you and me, and let's make sure we're on the same page, when really just getting that question out on the table might be a really healthy thing. And then someone identifying what you might be going into pairing and saying like, hey, we got to ask that during the next meeting, or let's make sure that we get this information from that person before we go any further, because who knows if this is really even a big issue, right? In the moment it feels like it's like the stakes are super high. So, or I guess another version of complacency is just you, like in those big meetings, you just are a wallflower, you say nothing, and some of the thoughts that you have or questions you have, like, really gonna start important discussion.
Yeah. I mean, I am really glad you brought up complacency, because that is something I need to be reminded about. Like, and I'm not making a joke. I'm being very, like, totally serious with you. It never occurs to me to be complacent. And so the fact that other people are like that's an important perspective for me to understand, that that's a risk for people. Because it's not like I'm on the opposite end of the spectrum, where we definitely work with people, and everybody's known people who their struggle is always going to be like, they don't care. It's just like, it's whatever. It's just, that thing. And I am the flip side, which is like, do you care too much? Are you putting too much energy into it?
Yeah. Well, and we should be clear, there's a difference between complacency and then having the right information, state of mind, wherewithal, whatever it is that tells you not now,
Right.
This is something that we could totally go down some road right now and dive into. I guess maybe it's translated to the overused getting into the weeds, right? Like choosing to not get into the weeds or go down a road that just isn't helpful at the moment is not complacency.
Right.
So.
Yeah. And, when you bring up the idea of complacency, now all the wheels are turning, because now I'm thinking about accountable teams. You can't have, I think people can be complacent about certain things. You can say, like, if our chairs are red, or if our chairs are green, or if our chairs are blue, I don't care. You can be complacent about that, right? And I can't, other people can. But uh, you can't have an accountable team and have anyone on that team be fully complacent all of the time. First of all, I don't think that's real.
Yeah.
I don't think there's anyone that is,
Right.
right? If they want to work for your team. I think there's a period in your career journey where you get to that point where nothing matters.
Mm.
Right? But if we are assuming that everyone, we're assuming everyone on this theoretical person's team is there for the long haul, right? No one's on their way out.
Mm.
Then total complacency can't exist, I think. Do you agree?
I think so. Just nothing is such a big word. Like to say that nothing matters to someone. I mean, that's, whew, I don't want to be inside that person's brain.
Yeah.
But
Yeah. But have you ever left a job feeling that way?
where nothing matters?
Yeah.
No.
Okay.
I didn't, man, I don't know. Maybe I need to dig into that one a little bit more. But I don't know. Immediately, my reaction is a very confident no. Like something has mattered. Something has always mattered.
Yeah.
I've been fortunate to like not have left a ton of jobs either. So maybe my story is just a tad different.
Yeah.
Not so different than anyone else. I mean, like it's not like it. Yeah. Anyway.
Yeah. I associate this with like the youngest version of me, right? So like when you are first in the job market, this is not to say that I don't think everyone could get there with an employer, but you already, at least I did, when I was first in the job market, like the stakes felt really low. Because there's a handful of things that I'm qualified to do. And my mind can't make a connection between them and the world getting better. Or whatever grand scheme I think I have at, 17. So you already go in with things being pretty low stakes.
Yeah.
And then as you're on your way out, it's like, well, I didn't actually care if I was doing this job in the first place. And now, either I've got a new job or my boss has been a jerk to me or like that. It's that kind of mindset. That's when that happened to me when I was a teenager. And that's where I can identify it. I think it still happens to people now, though.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah. I can believe that it happens.
Yeah.
I grew up working for my dad, starting from a really young age. And I think, the Raj. And I think, as I'm sitting here analyzing myself, I wonder if that has something to do with my confident answer about like something always mattering because from my very first job, um, talking about my very first job, like it was family business. It was working for my dad. It meant a lot. I mean, it meant food on the table.
Right. Right.
So, I mean, I don't think that I had the wherewithal or understanding of that at that time, but looking back for sure and having conversations with my parents since, like, I knew that the function of that business relied heavily on us kids being involved and, being part of the workforce. And so I think, just being heavily influenced by that experience at a young age, probably meant that when I worked in Target or at Target later in high school, there was a lot about that job that probably mattered more to me than, another person that didn't want that job in the first place or something. That's
Right.
throwing no shade at anyone, or I hope I'm not making myself sound like, I've just been so righteous and everything means so much in my whole life. That's not what I'm saying at all. But I think that all I'm saying is that experience at a young age probably influences my answer to your question.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that makes total sense.
Yeah.
And I think is an important point how people come at things from different angles. So do you think that having that be your experience, and I think the answer to this question is just an easy yes, makes it difficult for you to see how people could be complacent in their job.
Yeah. Oh, yes.
Yeah,
Yes. Very simple yes.
yeah.
Yeah, like, probably an overuse of the word, but, like, ownership is, like, something that I've always felt in, like, every
Mm.
job that I've had. Like, I remember having a feeling sorry, Target. I don't think I'm saying anything that'll get us into any trouble, that, like, I remember facing the health and beauty aisle, the worst job, like, bringing all of the boxes of makeup to the front to get that nice
Mm.
flat face and just make that aisle beautiful. Um, I remember feeling an ownership in that assignment. It sucked. I hated it, but always had a feeling of, this is me, this is mine,
Mm.
and the how this thing looks is a reflection of me. And
That's awesome.
yeah, and
Really.
others, and I also totally understand, and I think that that can be unhealthy at times for me to feel an ownership and things like that, because I'm sure that there's people on the other end of that scale that are like, this is all going to get messed up by 8:30 tomorrow morning, so like, why am I sweating about this? And they're not wrong. you
Mm.
know so uh, a healthy place is probably somewhere in the middle, but yeah, anyway, I really don't want to make this episode about me, Sue.
You know what? It's all about you. Now, I
I,
think the reason I'm so interested here is being accountable on a team. Ownership is part of it. Everyone has to feel that sense of ownership. And I, I'm really interested in this line of discussion because if you, as the executive director, uh, don't even have the idea that someone could not have ownership on their radar, on your radar,
Mhm.
um, it's a conversation we have to have. If you can't, I'm not saying you can't have empathy. I'm saying if you are not programmed to be able to think that way, if it's not in your frame of reference, then what assumptions do you make about how easy it is for people to have ownership,
Right.
about how common sense it should be when we just say, like, no, we have to have a shared fate, you guys all have ownership. Like, what shorthand could we possibly be using that isn't connecting with people?
Mhm.
Because they don't, I'm not saying our team doesn't take ownership.
Yeah.
I'm saying, if it affects your worldview, how does it affect how we talk to the team about it?
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Well, I
Yeah.
think I've grown a bit in that, like, I have some understanding, conscious or subconscious, that, like, not everyone feels that same way. Not to say that, like, subpar work is acceptable or anything like that, but I think you can tell when someone feels like they own that project or own their
Mhm.
job, their role, learn, get better. And then you can tell the difference from that, and when someone just is simply in a different stage of their career where they're learning and they're just green,
Right,
you know what I mean?
right.
And I think that, like, being able to detect that difference is something that, I'm sure I can get better at, but is something that I have gotten better at over time, is like,
Mm.
to know, like, okay, this person just straight up doesn't care right
Right.
now. They don't feel any ownership in this, or, hey, this person's just learning. That's gonna be what it
Mhm.
is. Done is better than perfect in this case. Let's go. They're learning. The next thing's gonna be better. Um, yeah. I kind of lost my train of thought there, but I think that it's all of this, everything that we're talking about today is like a journey and something that,
Mhm.
we progress at.
Right, right. Well, and I don't want you to get the perception that I think you're doing it wrong.
Yeah. No,
I'm
I
just,
get
I'm,
I get
I'm fascinated by the idea. Well, and also, uh, you and I, we have very different career journeys. And part of my career journey has taken me through training and frontline supervision. And so, I think I have developed a different perspective Because when you're at the beginning of someone's career, you, especially because, and this is no shade to younger people, but like when we're talking about the beginning of someone's career, like we're talking some pretty young people.
Yeah.
You start to see the, like, what I learned was there just are people who, they're either going to develop a care for what they're doing, or they inherently, this is maybe just the wrong place for them to be, and they're never going to develop a care for it. And to be able to it, and it is so important to be able to identify who those people are and how to respond to them if they're never, and I hate to use the term cut your losses, but to be able to say, like, listen, you just gotta, buddy, you just gotta get through the day. And if this is not where you want to be, hey, that's cool. Follow the rules, do everything right. I'm not going to ask you to make this your personality.
Yeah.
And then also to encourage the other people who are like, you want this to be your personality? Cool. Let's make it your personality. This is who you are now.
Right.
But to be able to have, like, to see people who are going to be inherently without ownership and make those decisions, like, are we keeping you from doing from being where you should be?
Right.
And are you cool with that?
Yeah. Right.
Like, if you do, there are certain parts of, there are certain jobs where, like, if you are meeting the qualifications of the job and nobody gets hurt, nobody gets screamed at, there's no swearing,
Yeah.
then just do it. And know that someday you've got to find something you care about.
Right. Yeah. And it's really important that you do, because we want you to be happy.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. We're climbing back out of that well and moving on back to talking about pairing, how it can be destructive.
Yeah.
I think we've made a really good case for it being destructive, but what have we missed?
Yeah. I mean, we've talked about some of the specifics, right? Like, I mean, just using the example of the meeting after the meeting, like, that wasn't on your calendar. What didn't you do because you had that meeting? So lost time, right?
Right.
Negative perceptions, especially when it's something where you're having conversations about someone or maybe something that isn't there to, defend themselves. That, the example you gave of, like, just each of you trying to get to agreement with each other to paint this picture that most often is a negative one, either about a person or something that a person owns, and which then might be a reflection on that person. Really, like, none of it might be true.
Right.
There may be aspects of truth in what you're saying, or you have evidence of something that helps paint this picture, but that's not what the picture is, and then the picture might wind up being much more negative. So yeah, those are two huge destructive outcomes of pairing.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and another one, if we look at, the intentionality behind having an accountable team, is that, getting back into that cycle where the team's not accountable, the manager is holding them accountable. So you have people, two employees go off and pair about a third, and they get themselves worked up to the point, well, finally, now I'm going to go talk to the manager. I'm going to tell that manager that they have to tell that person, this, and this, and this. Well, now what you've done, not that a manager is not responsible to make sure everyone is creative and doing their work and, doing all of those things. But what they're not responsible for is solving your imaginary petty problem.
Yeah.
I don't know how else to say it. Like, you don't need to go and figure out how a manager should be doing their job and then tell them what to say
Yeah.
and create this whole log jam of information. That is the purpose behind dealing with real issues as a team.
Right.
And also PS, one of the ways that I have always struggled with in that scenario, one employee sees a problem with another employee, they take it to a manager, the manager then is expected to go to the employee. That what is inherently useless about that, useless is a big word.
Hmm.
One of the things that's challenging about that is, if you come to me as manager and say, you have to tell Kevin that he's got to, that he's not following the dress code and he has to be wearing chinos all of the time. I don't know. Well, now you have set up a anonymized version of this conversation where your expectation is, I don't go and say, Kevin, Ben says you got to be wearing your chinos all the time. Ben said, he saw you, I don't know, wearing a child's tutu. And now I have to come and tell you, wear your freaking chinos. The next time Kevin is not wearing chinos and you see it, I can't go to you and say, well, Ben, I told him.
Right.
Because you set up an anonymous situation for us to deal with.
Mm-hmm.
So it's none of, if it's none of his business that you said it, well, it's none of your business what he said.
Yeah.
Right?
Right. Yeah.
So I have seen this so many times where you have to tell that person to stop doing that thing. Okay, well, I'll tell that person to stop doing that thing, but don't come back and ask me if I did. And PS, once you hand it to me to do that, then how I and that person deal with it, that's us. That's me and them.
Yeah.
You're out of it now. So if you don't like the result, maybe that manager reaches a different compromise with that employee because they go to that employee and say, hey, did you know that you were supposed to do this? Oh, well, I'm actually allergic to chinos.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm sure in
Okay,
some states.
yeah. So, okay, Kevin, we have to make an accommodation. You're allergic to chinos. So we'll talk about that accommodation. Well, this other employee is never going to get the satisfaction they want. And I think on really destructive teams, they don't care. That employee doesn't care if Kevin wears chinos or not. What they care is that everybody follows the rules.
Yeah.
And that if Kevin can get away with it, why can't I get away with it? And
Mm-hmm.
Kevin's getting something I don't get.
Yeah.
So it's that whole anonymous side of it. I mean, and the same thing when you're pairing and not going anywhere with it. The anonymization of it is unhealthy. It erodes trust on the team and it makes transparency impossible.
Right. Yeah. So many other issues can stem off of it too.
Right. Right.
Yeah. So
how do we avoid pairing, Ben?
Oh, great question.
Well, that was your question to ask though. So darn it.
It's okay. I mean, I think no, I think first thing is first, one, know what it is, right? Because that's the first step to detecting it, and I think that maybe the super easy easy way for me to answer this question and not go too deep is to just say, stop it. Like, stop it, stop doing that. But like you'll never be able to make it that simple if you don't know what it is to be able to identify it, right? So to know whether or not you're having a healthy one-on-one conversation or other kind of small group conversation, or maybe even, I mean, I suppose there's a version of a big group, like a large group conversation that can be pairing, right? Where
I think our team's
anyway,
done it. No,
yeah,
yeah, I think we
sure,
have.
yeah. So just knowing what it is and then having the ability to identify it and stop it is first thing first. So hopefully we've helped some. I mean, I know we've helped ourselves by having this discussion today, but hopefully
Yeah.
some listeners too, maybe we'll have the radar up to it and be like, yeah, this shouldn't happen here or shouldn't happen this way.
Yeah.
That's first things first. And I suppose maybe next level beyond that, share, like
Mhm.
share, be comfortable in identifying it with that person or that other group, share it with your team, and let them know like this is the thing that like I'm personally working on. My radar is up to detecting when this is happening, and I'm going to do my best to shut it down. And I think that
Mhm.
that actually might be a really crucial step, uh, particularly if you're trying to build a, at least a functional team or an accountable team, so that they know like, oh man, they really shut that conversation down really quick. I wonder if they think I'm like not on their side, or maybe they don't trust me in having this
Mhm.
real conversation. Because that person might just be thinking like, I'm just trying to have a real conversation. Maybe they think they're trying to even build trust with you, right? And
Mhm.
by you saying like, nope, not doing this thing, they might turn that to a negative. I
Mhm.
suppose that's one of those other like potential negative outcomes in trying to address with it. There's an opportunity to erode some trust, but that's
Right.
where like being transparent at a time and bringing the team along on this journey is incredibly important.
Yeah. Well, and I think too, you have the opportunity when you start to discuss it as a team to say, like, I personally am asking everyone on the team, like, we're gonna try and shut it down. Um, and push back if I say, nope, we're not gonna go down that road, we're not gonna pair, push back and say, here's what my intention is right now.
Mm,
And have that conversation. Cause I think, I'm trying to, we're definitely at the point in this recording where I'm like, what did we forget? What is everything else I can say? Um, but one of the things that I want to make sure we say out loud is not all private conversations are pairing.
sure, right.
And if you if you are genuinely going to one of your colleagues to say, I need to have this conversation either in the group or with this other person, and I don't know how to do it. Can you help coach me?
Mm,
That if that is where you stay with it and
yeah.
it doesn't turn into, yeah, you're right, that person's a real whatever,
Yeah.
then it's not pairing.
Sure.
It is preparing yourself, like coaching, mentoring, role playing, all of that stuff is important in, when you are learning a skill set.
Yeah.
So, uh, and so being able to push back and say, here's what my intentionality is right now. Here's what I'd like to do. That makes it not pairing. Also, final thought on that, because I want to make sure we say this out loud. Um, saying that your team is not going to be involved in pairing does not mean you cannot have confidential conversations with each other. Doesn't
Right.
mean that you can't go to your coworker and say, hey, it looks like some things are going on with you today. Do you want to talk about that? That's not
Right.
pairing,
Yeah. Right.
or hey, can I tell you a thing that's going on with me personally?
Yeah.
And can we have that conversation? That's not pairing.
Right.
Um, and in at the precise, if you hit the precise right line, also going to your coworker and saying, hey, I am worried about this person for this reason,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Um, that is not pairing.
Right.
It's when you say, oh yeah, I'm worried too, because they did this and this and this and that. And I
Mm,
get so frustrated when they do that.
yeah.
So
Yeah.
that's the line you have to draw.
Right. I'm really glad that you mentioned the line, and for the listeners who's drawing this line on the
I've
screen,
drawn so many lines.
because I think it's incredibly tough to identify, and it's
Mhm.
very easy to define it as blurry, and for you to go in with all the right intentions and then it turn into pairing. It,
Yeah.
like, so it's so tempting, it's so human.
Mhm.
Um and not to justify it or make it sound like it's okay, but to acknowledge that it's imperfect and it's blurry and very difficult,
Yeah.
I think is important, I guess, is all that I'm trying to say, because sometimes these things can sound so simple and so easy. Like, oh, when I go into that conversation, I just need to say, hey, I need to check in, or, whatever, give some sort of preamble to make the conversation safe. And then it flips into pairing, like,
Mhm.
that's not how it works.
Yeah.
Um, or the first part of the conversation is truly genuinely one of those healthy private conversations, or healthy is not the word I wanted to use there, but and then it transforms into pairing, because it's a rabbit hole that you can go down to
Mhm.
or go down. So anyway, both of your things that you wanted to say out loud, I think addressing the line and its challenges, the challenges that come with the line, I think are really important.
Yeah. Awesome. So what are our
Cool.
next steps?
Next steps, have the team listen to this episode. We're
Yeah.
just gonna market the crap out of this episode and say, hey guys, listen to this thing.
And we shouldn't have to, because it's
We
like
should-
right there.
Yeah, it is right there.
Yeah. I'm really excited to get 4 more listeners.
Yeah. It's all about those metrics, right?
It's true. It's true. Yeah.
What else? What else is next, Sue?
Well, and then have this discussion with them.
Yeah.
I honestly think this is a tough discussion,
Yeah.
because I think looking at everything we need to talk about, when we talk about how are we going to build this ideal accountable team, this is probably one of those things, number one, that is most likely to get people pairing after we talk about it. I picture in my head, like having to have this trying to have a really open and frank conversation on the team, on any team, and just getting crickets. And then the meetings that happen after the meeting, like, why did they pretend that? Why did they say that we were pairing?
Right.
Right.
Yeah.
So, I think
Well,
that's
hopefully we can lay some expectations or ground rules to,
yeah.
I guess level set a bit and let them know that while we are aware that pairing might be happening, we're not having this conversation about any one specific instance of it, or somebody being a repeat offender or anything like that. It's just this is a real issue on many teams, and ours is no different. And if we don't talk about it,
Mhm.
ain't gonna change.
Right. Right. And there's a lot of positive about changing it.
Yeah,
You
for sure.
mentioned trust.
Yeah.
And that's like number one. This is one of the things that eliminating that pairing does is sign a new social contract, right? So I
Yeah.
think we talked about on one of the episodes before about that social contract. If I don't talk about how you do your job and you don't talk about how I do my job in front of other people, and that's our contract. Well,
Yeah.
this is a new contract, which is I do bring up real issues with the intention of helping you.
Yeah.
And as long as my intentionality, everybody's intentionality is good, then we build this different kind of trust.
Yeah. What a growth opportunity. I think of like, the example of like not asking a question in the big group because you don't know something, or there's, an issue that you want to bring up, aren't comfortable, and then you save it for the pairing.
Mhm.
We've all probably been in a meeting where somebody asks one of those questions in the big group that is an uncomfortable one or whatever. And if not everybody in the room, 95% of the room is like, oh my God, thank God they asked it and not me.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
well, hey, you're not only are you helping yourself, but you're probably helping everyone else in the room too by just asking the thing, and you wind up saving everybody's time that,
Yeah.
they're having those conversations after or whatever. So anyway, that's just one tiny little example.
It's a great one.
Yeah.
Well, thanks for this great discussion.
Yeah.
Today.
Thank you.
It was fun.
It
Gosh,
was.
I love doing my job like this. This is so fun. And listeners, we appreciate you joining us on this journey. We hope you keep coming back to hear more. And you can always follow us on social media or get in touch with us at our website at exclamationqso.com.
Thanks, Sue. Thanks everyone for tuning in. Be awesome. We'll see you next time.
The Awesomology Podcast is a production of Exclamation Services. Thanks to Nick Mulliver for sound production and Kylie Ganther for our cover artwork.
Executive producers are me, Ben Bauer, and my friend Suzanne Campbell.